Now, for more on the state of readiness for the Electoral Commission, as they have officially published the election timetable, I am joined by the IEC CEO, Mr. Sy Mamabolo. Mr. Mamabolo, thank you so much for your time. Now, you held a media briefing earlier today just to discuss some of your readiness. How are the system looking now? Is it all systems go? What's going on behind the scenes before we reach that crucial date of 29 May?
Well, to reach 29 May, there are certain important activities that must be performed. And among those activities is the applications for special votes to ensure that those of our compatriots who are in special circumstances are given an opportunity to cast their votes, hopefully in circumstances of secrecy as well as dignity. Then comes the issue of the voters' roll, very important, that an opportunity is given to inspect the voters' roll and for objections to be raised where they are warranted. And then on the 12th of February, then we will certify the voters' roll, and so by so doing indicate that it is the basis upon which an election is going to be happening. At the same time, we have to receive the list of candidates and the nomination requirements on the 8th of March by 5 p.m. and go through the necessary processes, publish the list, allow people to raise objections, give the Commission an opportunity to look at those objections and decide them. And if still there are people who remain aggrieved, then they can appeal the decision of the Commission to the electoral court. So there's a myriad of electoral activities that must now happen on the basis of the timetable. It is not a measure to disadvantage anyone, but really to create certainty in the system and for both role players, i.e. political parties, independent candidates, as well as the general voting public.
And just taking a look at the numbers that you've received as well for people who have managed to register, I believe there will be no other voter registration drive to take place until May. But there was huge and vehement campaigning, an aggressive campaigning to make sure that as many people go and register to vote. Unfortunately, I think it was the day of that deadline at midnight, that number for the unregistered youth voters was still standing at around 14 million. What's the total number of registered voters as it stands right now?
Well, we are doing validations of all the applications we received and checking whether people are citizens and things like that. We will certify the voters' roll on the 12th of March. But at the moment, we're looking at about 27.6 million thereabout, with the potential for an increase. But I think it's important that we put this aspect into perspective. That over the 2 registration weekends that we've had, young persons in the age categories 20 and 29 have been a substantial majority of those that were coming onto the voters' roll for the first time. I think it's a fact that we've got to acknowledge. Nonetheless, because they were coming, the young persons were coming off a low base, they are still not as highly represented on the voters' roll as is the case with other age categories, precisely because historically they've had an underrepresentation. But I think we're beginning to see positive signs of improvement, and I guess it will take a bit of time to fully redress.
Yeah, well, those numbers are quite impressive. There are milestones that have been reached for the first time in democracy as well with those kinds of numbers. But also talking about the objections to the voters' roll, you spoke quite a bit about that. We've seen reports about apparent voters who have been registered at one house, where it will be hundreds of people who were registered at one house. Is this what the IEC is going to be verifying at this point in time?
Well, first of all, that post that has been circulating it's a dated post because it's a story that was carried by one of the newspapers last year, and it's a matter that was dealt with when it happened. So it just shows you that digital disinformation is going to be a big issue in these elections. So whatever posts and things that are distributed have to be treated with a measure of circumspection. But certainly, the opportunity between now and the 4th of March, the 4th of indeed March, is an opportunity for people to look at the voters' roll, to point out issues such as those. It may well be that there's a reason why that was the case. It may be that somebody did not do their work as they ought to have done. But this inspection opportunity is meant to address such anomalies on the voters' roll, so that by the time the voters' roll is certified, all the issues are dealt with, and we have a fair basis upon which to prepare for the elections.
You know, you make mention of disinformation, and it always is such a big problem in general, but also particularly for elections. And earlier at your media briefing, it was the IEC Vice Chairperson, Janet Love, who spoke about issues of contestation regarding party identification as well, which is also a big problem. But, you know, when we have more political parties who are contesting now as well, and some may seem similar, some may look similar, it may be confusing for voters. It is a tricky one because, I mean, with some of these matters, they are before the courts and there's really little that the IEC can do. But what are you doing in terms of these kinds of disputes where there are challenges of, yes, disinformation, but also identification?
Well, in ideal circumstances, parties ought to be distinguishable one from the other, and really that's the basis upon which we are called to register parties, so that those parties that are already on the party register, their identifiers are protected and not infringed upon by others, especially the incoming parties onto the roll. So it calls for really great political maturity to avoid trying to mimic, as it were, the existing identifiers of parties already registered. But we do find attempts, some of them quite insistent attempts, to try to get as close as possible to an existing party. And it's something that I think over time we have to find ways of ameliorating, because ultimately registering party identifiers is meant to assist the voter to distinguish one party from the other. It's about the quality of offering we give to the voter in the election process. So we've got to ensure that we do not inadvertently confuse the voter in the manner in which these party identifiers are drawn.
I'm sure you would have heard as well in our headlines, you know, and also getting the reaction from a number of political parties who've expressed their grievances as well, and they have called on the IEC to reconsider and extend the deadline and paperwork as well as the payments. Is this something that the IEC is going to take into consideration? Well,
firstly, the IEC can never be closed off to meeting with parties. So to the extent that there may be a request for a meeting, the IEC will positively consider such a request. Having said that, it is important that we all realize that there are new complexities inherent in this election. Firstly, the number of contestants, both political parties and independent candidates, and the impact of that on the dimensions of a ballot paper. So something that could have taken us 21 days to do in this election it's much more complex. You've got to produce a ballot paper of dimensions currently unknown and ensure that that ballot paper is put into books of 100, stitched into a ballot book, and packaged and distributed correctly to the right voting station. Those things take time, and they need to be performed with a measure of accuracy. So if you congest the time for that process, the impact is that you may not be able to be logistically ready to offer the country a free and fair election. So we've got to look at this thing as a system, that any delay on one activity has implications for the rest of the activities on the timetable. So really, we really want stakeholders to understand that. The Commission is not seeking to cash out anyone. The Commission is trying to put in place processes for an orderly conduct of elections. That's really the primary motivator for the Commission.
So a consequence of extending that deadline would also have a consequence on our election date as well, I'm assuming. Well, thank you so much for your time and joining us for your insights this evening. That was Sy Mamabolo.